Hello class, my name is Zachary Takesian, and for my Social Work 306 presentation, we will be discussing the life of Jeannette Rankin. Rankin was the first female to hold federal office in the United States and provided much aid to the women's suffrage movement of that time, both at the state and at the federal levels. Rankin was born on June 11, 1880, near Missoula, Montana. The eldest daughter of a rancher and a schoolteacher, she initially followed in her mother's footsteps and found herself working as a teacher after graduating the University of Montana in 1902. She would also work as a seamstress when she became bored of teaching. In her early adult life, Rankin would enroll in the Montana State University, now the University of Montana, where she would graduate with a degree in biology and begin her teaching career. However, once she found her calling for social work, she would enroll at the New York School of Philanthropy, and she would also later go on to study at the University of Washington, Seattle. As previously mentioned, Rankin did not start her working life in the social work field, rather opting to follow in her mother's footsteps as a school teacher and later a seamstress's apprentice. However, Rankin did not feel a sense of fulfillment in these jobs and would begin working as a social worker in Washington State after graduating from the New York School of Philanthropy. While attending the University of Washington, Seattle, Rankin joined the local women's suffrage movement, where she would become a key speaker for the cause. The Washington movement was successful in gaining women's suffrage for the state of Washington in 1910. This would mark Rankin's first effect on public and social welfare policies. Rankin had also been active in California for a short time, working as a social worker in San Francisco for a few months, providing social services to poor immigrants. During this time, she would join the cause of women's suffrage once again, aiding in the successful campaign for the state. California received women's suffrage on October 10th of 1911. Now experienced in politics and social welfare, Rankin turned her focus to her home state of Montana in 1914, where she became the legislative secretary of the National American Woman Suffrage Association, which involved lobbying legislatures for the cause of women's right to vote. She ran a successful campaign in her home state, and Montana granted women's suffrage in 1914. In 1916, Rankin decided to run for one of the two seats up for re-election in the House of Representatives in her home state of Montana. Running on a progressive platform for the Republican Party, she advocated for social welfare issues as well as campaigning against the United States' involvement in World War I. She would come in second place in the campaign, winning one of the two open seats. Rankin's win in the election would mark the first time in United States history when a woman would be elected into federal office. This win came at a time where most women in the United States had not yet received the right to vote. This would pave the way for women in Congress, as the number of women in office would grow in the years following. Congress would be called into session on April 6, 1917, to vote on the United States' involvement in World War I. Rankin, a staunch pacifist and moderate isolationist, strongly opposed the U.S. aiding the European Allied efforts. However, a large majority of Americans supported war against Germany, putting Rankin directly at odds with her constituents. Fellow suffragists pleaded for Rankin to vote with the majority for the war, as they believed a vote against the widely backed call to action would ruin Rankin's public image and their chances for the cause. While she would abstain from the congressional debate prior to the vote, she would continue to vote against involvement after giving a lengthy speech prior to casting her final vote. Unfortunately for Rankin, the suffragist fears came true, as her vote against the war turned many of her constituents against her. However, in the remaining time of her term, Rankin would fight for women's rights in the workplace and go on to create the Committee on Women's Suffrage, to which she was appointed the leader. She would also propose an amendment to the Constitution for women's suffrage, which passed the House but died in the Senate. The 19th Amendment would pass a year after. Rankin would go on to lose her race for the re-election in 1918, mostly due to her public image being tarnished after her vote against the war. She would campaign the same year to serve as a senator for the state of Montana, but would also lose this campaign. She would continue to fight for gender equality on both a national and international scale in the years following. Following the end of her congressional term, Rankin would serve as a delegate to the Women's Institutional Conference for Peace in Switzerland. Here, she would meet many notable suffragists and women's rights activists such as Emily Bulk, Jane Addams, and many more. She would also go about joining the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in 1919. Rankin would also continue her work on the home front, as she would go on to serve many other social welfare associations. Among these were the National Consumers League, an entity which advocates for workers' rights. While working here, Rankin would lobby Congress on social welfare legislation and had attempted to pass a constitutional amendment to end child slavery. Rankin would also go on to help found the Georgia Peace Society in 1928, an organization that would attempt to dissuade people from war and even attempt to make war an illegal way of resolving conflict. The following year, Rankin would become the leading lobbyist and speaker for the National Council for the Prevention of War and would continue to do so for the following decade. Rankin turned her focus back on a congressional seat for Montana once again in 1940. The United States was again debating war against the Axis powers in Europe and Japan, and Rankin, ever the pacifist, knew that she could not let her country enter another costly war. She would win the campaign once again, largely due to her anti-war platform, ironic considering the same platform had kicked her out of office. Amid her second term as Congresswoman, Rankin found herself in nearly the exact same position as her first term. While she was elected on her platform of anti-war, she would find herself once again under scrutiny for her pacifist views. Following the attack of Pearl Harbor, public opinion would once again sway in favor of war, and she would be the only member of Congress to vote against it, at 388 to 1. Once again, the public became disinterested in Rankin after her lone vote against World War II. When her second term ended, she decided not to run for re-election. Rather, she continued to advocate for pacifism for the remainder of her years. She would protest the Korean War and even organized a march of 5,000 people in Washington against the Vietnam War in 1968 at 88 years old. Rankin would also be known for visiting other countries in her free time, especially India, as she admired the ideologies presented by Gandhi's nonviolent protests. Rankin would live up until 1973, where she had passed away in Carmel, California, at the age of 93. Around this time, she was considering running for a third term in office to once again oppose the U.S. going to war.